But first, Huw Edwards, should he hand back his salary to the BBC? 020 7862 2222. The head of the Beeb has branded the disgraced newsreader's crimes appalling and said he wants to recover part of his salary. Edwards received a 6-month suspended sentence on Monday after admitting to having images of child sex abuse on his phone. He was arrested back in November. He was paid about £200,000 after that by the BBC. Yesterday, the Director General, Tim Davie, said the BBC has asked him formally to give the money back. Do you think they're right to do that, Tessa?
I think this is a case of the horse has bolted and the BBC desperately trying to exonerate themselves. They turned Huw Edwards into a giant star. They gave him, in my humble opinion, an inflated salary for arguably just reading auto cue with a Welsh accent. And then when he was being investigated by the police, I believe that the BBC were informed of the gravity of the charges that were being investigated.
But told not to tell anyone.
But they still decided, they made the decision to carry on paying him. And what beggars belief, in my opinion, is why there wasn't a communication with Huw about optics in this case, that they could back pay him if he wasn't found to be guilty, but just have an off-the-record discussion about, look, it's best for all parties if we suspend this payment until we see what the outcome of the law is.
My understanding is that it's not as easy as that to get in touch with Huw prior to his conviction. So it's not.
Well, then just suspend it.
You can't just ring the guy up. So then the question is, could they go to him and say, listen, you've been arrested, are you guilty? And if he says, to be honest, yes, I am, then you stop paying him. If he says, no, I'm not, they say, OK, we'll pay you, but we want it back if you're found guilty. But he did go and plead guilty, so it's not really an issue, is it? I mean, he knew he was guilty.
It's a lot of money, and he was paid, a lot of money for performing on television. So first of all, when he's not turning up for work, I don't think you deserve that level of pay. It's different to being, a doctor or a nurse who's, incapable of going to work. Of course, they need to earn what they would earn for being in the office. But he was paid to be on telly. He wasn't. He did not earn that money. And as you say, he knew, and he should have known what was coming. And the BBC should have thought about it and said, I'm sorry, you've been arrested and explored over very serious crimes. We are going to suspend your pay from this moment on. And yes, as you suggest, they could have reinstated it.
Yeah, I mean,
they're not going to get it back. They're asking for
he
it
won't.
back.
He won't give it back. No.
And that to me is merely, it's sort of ridiculous. It's the BBC trying to make good, really a PR disaster.
So you think that don't give it back because that lets the BBC off the hook? That's what you're thinking?
Yeah, and actually one of my bigger issues is with the BBC, the way in which they penny pinch at the fringes. Stringers, fixers, freelancers have this ever-diminishing return. And yet your big, bold stars who trip up on their ego, do we think Huw Edwards would have behaved in this revolting and cavalier fashion had he not had an enormous platform, an enormous salary and a status beyond his abilities, Jeremy? And that's the truth.
It's interesting. Guto and I both know Huw personally.
But I don't.
He was unusual in his manner and his view of himself, his grandiosity.
Right.
I don't think there are that many other people in the BBC like him,
I think
actually.
Historically,
you think there are?
Historically, I've worked at the BBC when I saw, interestingly, some of the managers behave in an equivalent way. But there is, in an organisation like the BBC, a corporation, both front of camera stars and behind the scenes, where some people are protected. It's almost harder to sack some people at the BBC than it is get rid of the Pope.
I see. So this comes back to the 200,000, which is Guto Tessa's argument is, look, the BBC has been wasteful with it, so does not deserve to get it back.
Yeah, I think that's slightly unfair because he was an extraordinary talent and presenter, and they don't grow on trees. And there are some things about, him and some of the others who earn that kind of money that's exceptional. Most people in the BBC do not. Nor do they have the airs and graces.
He was exceptional because the BBC gave him an exceptional platform. I bet you I could find 10 Welshmen who were as capable as Huw Edwards was at the news if I'd been given the
you say that, because it's so tempting. I mean, there's a thing called the Wogan paradox, which is that Terry Wogan was so brilliant, he made it look effortless. And
Yeah.
as a result, when you heard Terry Wogan on the radio, you said anyone could do that. And bless him, Terry would say, yes, it's just the same old rubbish every day. And we know that's not the case,
But
right?
he
Or
had
you think he was rubbish as well?
Just to clarify, you're a genius as well.
No,
I think
don't
no.
say that.
But here, because I tell you why, because you make it look effortless. But you are freewheeling, you're ad-libbing, you're taking calls, just like Terry
But
Wogan
Huw did that
was.
on his, forget the news, we're right off the
Yeah,
news.
Right.
We're talking here, Git and I talking about the state occasions, right? And apart from it, nobody wants to do them, right? Because they're really hard to do. And if you get it wrong, you are, suspended from a gantry in public and have fruit thrown at you. But just you do them year after year.
And just one thought on the practicalities. Presumably he has a pension pot, having worked for the BBC for so long, which gives the BBC leverage over him.
Does
Because
it?
they could, I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine that sitting on that pension pot, they could say, if you want to talk about access to that pension pot, which he's, earned over the years, then let's talk about the 200,000.
That is a very interesting point you make. I've seen it reported that his pension will be, or maybe is already, £280,000 a year, but I don't know that. I wonder what, I've got somebody else say it's about 200,000. Who knows? It's worth millions. But we know pension law is very difficult.
Yes.
Primrose Shipman is in receipt of an NHS pension earned by a serial killer.
Yeah.
She's the widow of Harold Shipman.
Yeah.
They can't even get that off Primrose Shipman. Maybe they don't want to. So the idea that BBC could say, OK, we'll take it from... It's hard.
Yeah.
They're not able to reach into someone's pension pot. But maybe that's the answer. What about that? They say to Huw, right, we don't care about the law. We're suspending your pension.
Well, and again, I would say that is the BBC concerned about the optics of this particular event, moment and man. But actually, the root and branch reform, I think, needs to be done, where there is a disconnect between those who are obscenely well paid at the top end of the BBC, both on and off screen, and those lower down, and the freelancers, often working in foreign countries, often working in quite dangerous conditions, who are not. And I would like to see some equality.
All right, I hear you. Margaret in Fife, hi.
Hello there.
What do you think? Should he pay this money back, Huw Edwards?
Yes, definitely. And he should lose his pension.
OK, so you would take his pension. I mean, the pension is a colossal amount of money. It's to get a 200, let's say it's 250,000 a year.
Wow.
I think you need to multiply it by 26 to get the value of it. So that's that's 4 to 5 million pounds.
He's apparently his estimated worth is between 2.4 million and 3.8
Yeah, but that doesn't
million
include
pounds.
the pension.
No, but that's
the
just what he
pension is. I'm just trying to think. If you multiply 250,000 by 26, what do you get to?
A lot of
That's
money.
how you work it out. So I think that's 5 to 6 million. You would seize it, Margaret?
Why should the British taxpayer pay a TV licence to pay people like Huw Edwards?
Yeah.
Okay,
When
I've
he's
just been
already
told
got
it's £6.5 million pound pension.
And he's already got loads of money. Even if you stopped all streams of revenue arriving at Huw Edwards' door, he would be just fine.
I tell you what, Margaret, one thing is interesting. There's a very interesting precedent on this. We all remember the financial crisis, and certain key figures were at the centre, and RBS were absolutely pivotal, disastrous banking operation run by a guy called Fred Goodwin. Mm-hmm. So Fred Goodwin's pension was about 600,000.
Yeah, it's enormous.
And he had so much opprobrium, he accepted it being cut in two. And he ended up with 300,000 a year, which is still big. But, he could see he was never going to...
Fred Goodwin was not an on-screen ego, and you've already identified Huw as being grandiose even within the giant ego forest of television.
Well, yeah, it's more. I look to my friend Guto because we worked with him very, very closely for many years.
Do you
grandiose
see
is not. There's something very fragile about him as well.
Yeah,
very prickly and sensitive.
Exactly, that's the sort of paradox. Is all that arrogance is disguising a very, very thin skin and a very insecure and quite chippy person, and it was always a bit of the giveaway. But in terms of being a performer, in full flight, if you like, there was no one like him, and those people don't grow on trees, and it is what it takes. Nobody wants to see the news read or the state occasion presented by somebody who's scared of their own shadow. Says, "Well, I'm a bit worried about what to tell you. I don't have the confidence to say that this is what it's." you need a bit of a big ego to be that person fronting the show.
I would just argue that there's a few stars in the BBC News world that get all the oxygen, and you can't bring up the next layer of talent if you've got just a couple of individuals doing all those big gigs, because you need to be battle-hardened.
Well, that's a different thing. That's about whether you
But it's like future-proofing.
stop so-called bed blocking.
Yeah.
And I agree that some of the people who stepped up, like Clive Murray, I think, is faultless. Rita Chakrabarti,
Loads of them.
amazing.
There was quite a few.
And without the airs and graces.
They are frontline.
You want them moved on, do you?
No, I don't.
right.
But I just think it's a
You just
bit
want
like...
Sophie Rayworth moved on.
No, I don't want them moved on. I would just like, maybe they could
Fiona
do
Bruce?
slightly fewer gigs, and we could see some younger people, other people moved alongside them. So you don't have distorted pay salaries and distorted egos, where Huw is bigger than the news that he's reading.
He was in an exceptional position. I think that, there is nobody else in that position. It's rather like there won't be that position again. I think partly because we've moved away from analog.
Yeah.
The analog
Legacy
idea
media.
that the fronting the main bulletin is the biggest job. Edwards is not impecunious. He has a pension, we reckon it might be worth £6 million, and the BBC's just asked him to return £200,000, but he hasn't apparently yet replied. Do you think he should do it? 0207 862 2222. Tessa and Guto are with us, and we'll ask later if junior doctors are greedy. They've got a 22% raise, but they say there may be more strikes unless their pay keeps going up. OK, more calls on Huw Edwards, disgraced but highly well rewarded by the BBC. Who have we got on the line now? Let's have a look. Is there, let me see. Lynn in Lancashire, hi.
Hi there, Jeremy.
What do you think? It's a miserable story, isn't it?
Well, I think the whole thing is absolutely disgusting, but he won't pay the money back because he's a grimy little toad. He'll be getting £300,000 a year pension, but the BBC are at fault for not stopping paying him while he was suspended. Why isn't he in prison? But he played the mental health card and said he had no memory of viewing these images while paying people to send disgusting images of him. Yeah. Then we're told, oh, he is at suicide risk. Well, do yourself a favour, Huw. Why don't you kill yourself? You're a revolting old man.
Don't say that, because if he does then do that, you'll feel terrible about saying that. Thank you, Lynn. We can see the Director General, Tim Davie, speaking about Huw Edwards now.
We want the money back.
Have you asked for it back?
And we've asked for it back.
And
we're waiting for an answer, and that's where we are.
Have you had any response from Huw Edwards to your request for that?
There's discussions between legal teams, I believe, but that's as far as I can go at this point. It was a very difficult call, but we decided that pay continues until someone is charged, and no one knew that gap was going to be so long. But pay continues to his charge, and then you can say goodbye to someone.
So hindsight's a wonderful thing, but was that the right decision?
I think it was the right decision based on the policies. It was acted in, we acted in totally in good faith.
Yeah, I know you're banging the table here, but you would want him sacked as soon as he's arrested?
I know the benefit of hindsight, but the likes of Tim Davie, who's not instilling us with huge amounts of confidence there with his managerial, because he was felt a bit phlegmatic, to be honest.
You want him to basically on day one, because there would have been people who said to Tim Davie on day one, get rid of him now. No, and by the way, day one being the day it was revealed that Huw had paid £35,000 to a younger person.
I'm really clear, having worked in and outside the BBC for many years on and off, I think that people of status within that organisation are overly revered and often they're untouchable. And clearly, Huw Edwards was one of those individuals. I've heard enough about him prior even to this happening to know that he was in some ways an ego out of control, and quite why he was remunerated and platformed consistently. This was an accident waiting to happen. And the idea that the BBC can somehow claw back their reputation by clawing back what is small change.
It's just that in the end, you do have to basically stop paying him when he's arrested. Because I'm just thinking, my friend Paul Gambaccini had a situation a few years ago where he was falsely accused in a completely devastating way. The police then investigated him very, very slowly. And thankfully, he's back on the air, and it's all, it was completely, his name was completely cleared without any stain on his reputation. He was never charged with anything, etc. You're under the Tessa Dunlop rules. You throw him out the day the police call at his house. And
you safeguard against creating individuals like this, which the BBC don't do enough about.
I'm making the point that you can't do that, right?
I'm making the point that you can, Jeremy, because
someone falsely accuses you and you get the sack.
Yeah, I'm a stickler for due process because there, but for the grace of God, go I. And you don't want to live in a world where all you need to do is to level an accusation and you achieve your aim of destroying the person who may be a rival of yours, who may be somebody you loathe because of their political views. I don't want to live in a world where there is no due process. Yeah. And we used to think that things like innocent until proven guilty mattered. I think it still does. In Huw's case, though, it was pretty clear early on whether he was guilty of the disgusting crimes he's now admitted to, but it was early on that he had gone from being an asset to being a liability to the BBC. And I think the BBC were perfectly entitled at that point, a long time ago, before he was arrested, say, Huw, do you know what? You're no longer the face of the BBC.
This was the Sun's story. He hadn't broken the law, but he had paid a teenager money for explicit photos.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, fair point.
And at that point in time, you say, you're not the man to be in everyone's living room, funded by a sort of tax that you cannot avoid called the licence fee. You're no longer that person. And I'm sorry, we'll manage you out carefully.
And I also think you made a very good point about if you're not performing, doing your job in full, you don't get paid in full.
Let's go to Mary in Glasgow. Hi, Mary.
Hello.
Do you think they should keep asking for the money?
Yes, definitely. The BBC started charging pensioners over 75 for the full pension, for the full licence fee that they got free up to a certain point. Only if you're on benefits now do you get it free. If you've got a small pension, you're not on benefits, you have to start paying a television licence. I've been paying it now since that came out, and I think it's ridiculous. They're taking money off the pensioners to pay the likes of Huw Edwards this massive amount of money that he's been getting is shocking, absolutely shocking.
The BBC pension scheme is like all pension schemes, it needs floating, and some money from the licence fee goes direct into it now.
It's a very generous pension scheme.
You make a salient point. Simon on X says the money should be repaid personally by the person or persons responsible for authorising the salary increase and continued payments to Edwards. Then there's Jane on Facebook. By rights, it's his money. That just shows the protection in how contracts are written. He should voluntarily give it back, though, which would show the public he really is sorry for what he's been found guilty of. As you know him, Guto, do you think he will give it back?
It's a tough one because there's a shamelessness there. At one level, he cares massively what people think of him, and he's gone out of his way. He drives cross-country late at night to give talks to 30 women in North Wales or wherever about, the Welsh language and stuff. There's a part of him that is very sensitive to what people think of him, but all that is now, gone. And so I don't think anyone's going to think less badly of him if he hands back 200,000. So he just misses it out. So I think you're right, Tessa, that this is really about saving face for the BBC, not for Huw. If I was him, I certainly would, because it does all right, give it to charity. Maybe not give it back to the BBC, but just say, let's give it to a charity that looks after abused kids.
Yeah.
Something like that. It's not going to rehabilitate him, but at least there's some little good that comes of all this evil. We've got some more clip of Tim Davie. Just let's look again.
Will Huw Edwards work for the BBC again?
I can't see that happening.
Why not?
For obvious reasons. Well, this man has just been convicted of appalling crimes, and it's not. It's pretty straightforward in my mind that I can't see him working at the BBC again.
This idea that there's even a question that he could come back. What the hell is going on?
But there isn't a question. I think Amol Rajan was playing to the audience.
No, but I heard Adam Bolton on the air saying, you can never say never.
Yeah.
I think in the case of Huw
some weird
Edwards,
stuff is going down here.
And I read that his own LinkedIn was saying last week he was available for charitable work for nothing.
Well, I thought that was very interesting. So Huw Edwards put a LinkedIn notice up saying he would do free work for charities to advise them on comms. And it was so bombarded that he had to take it down straight away. And, so he's testing the water maybe. Paul in Essex, hi.
Hi, yeah.
Yeah, so should he give the money back?
Well, the reason why I've rung in, Joe, is because people are criticising the BBC, but at the end of the day, you have to remember that in this country, you are innocent until proven guilty. Now, although Huw Edwards has actually admitted his guilt, he didn't at the time he was suspended, he hadn't given any admission. So how could the BBC possibly have withdrawn his salary until such time as he was actually proven guilty?
Say what Guto said, which is, I'm sorry, mate, you've gone from being an asset to being a bit of baggage, and we're dropping you off the side. And then you say, fight us in court if you want to. That's the answer to your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, morally, he should give the money back.
Okay.
But legally, the BBC would be severely criticised. I mean, do you remember the episode with Cliff Richard? When the police had tipped off the journalists and so on.
Oh.
I mean, there's been numerous cases where people people have been found innocent. So you cannot just.
I'm only pausing because we've got to go to our break. But thank you for your call very much indeed, Paul. Later we'll be asking, have you ever left old furniture?